story. You know, it's like a herald reunion. I can't begin to tell you how close I feel. To see all these people I haven't seen sometimes in years, and to see them all together, this is huge. It's like, you know, like when they did "We Are the World," the song, and all the artists came in to sing the song. That's what this is, the "We Are the World" of photography, right? So, without further ado, I want to introduce a woman who has just been such an inspiration for so many great photographers. The guide in life for all of us. Who's going to give you a little bit of her story now. Please give it up for Miss Maggie Steele.
Okay, how's that? Oh,
It's working.
I have to think smarter now. Not that you need to know that, but first of all, what a tough act to follow. And I can't tell you how much his pictures mean to me because I think at this moment in time we really need to be very mindful about what's happening to all of the wild animals. And we really need to know more about them. They're our brothers and sisters, and we need to take much better care of them. So in the zoos, we get to see how the animals look and how they act, and I think this will make us much more mindful of the importance of our brothers and sisters. Without them, we're done. So, but how's that for making you happy? So I don't know what to do about it. Okay. Well, I'm Maggie Steele. I'm a documentary photographer is how I call myself. I tell a lot of stories of other people and places and things like that. I don't know, maybe we have to unplug it and do it again. Let's see if that helps.
Oh God, I'm not a techie.
It, you know what? It was working. I need it.
Who's the tech guy for AVC here?
Tech guy. Okay. Sorry. This worked earlier. Do you want to? Yeah. Oh. Okay, well, I want to do it the first. Okay, but okay. Well, after all of that uplifting, beautiful work, I'm going to show you 3 stories that are not so uplifting, but maybe one of them is uplifting. So, can you hear me? Okay, everybody in the back? Okay. Well, I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit, and then I'm going to show you the work. So, I'm a photographer. Yeah. I've worked in 72 countries around the world. I have worked a lot for National Geographic magazine, Lord, and I've just had a very privileged life. But I wanted to tell you something, first of all, how I got started, because when you look at these pictures that we do, it always seems like they're doing all of this work, but in fact, we had to start somewhere. So I'm going to tell you very briefly how I got to be a photographer. So I studied photography. I was a French major in university. I was going to be a high school French teacher in Texas, where I grew up, where they don't even want to learn Spanish. And I thought, what am I thinking? So I had a friend who was studying photography, and she needed to make pictures showing still action and portraits and all kinds of things. So I would be her model because I used to dance. I used to be a dancer, and I liked, I don't know, doing it. And she would bring the pictures for me to see. I thought, this is amazing. I would like to do this. And so I changed my major to Anyway, and when I graduated, I heard that there was an opening at a small paper in Galveston, Texas. I grew up in Austin, Texas. So I drove down there to apply for the position. It was for a reporter photographer. And I went to the paper and I found the managing editor. And I said, I'd like to apply for this position. And he said, well, honey, you're not hiring a woman for this job. And I said, oh, well, why is that? Can you tell me why? This was a long time ago. You couldn't say that to somebody now. But he said, well, you know, you have to go to all these little towns around Galveston and do the police report. You have to go photograph football and in other towns. And if something happens to you on the road, we can't be responsible. So I said, well, just tell me about, since I drove down, if you just tell me what the job is about. So he said, okay. So I thanked him and I got up and I went to his door. And then I turned around and I said, what time do you come to work in the morning? And he kind of looked at me and he said, 9 a.m. And I said, okay, I'll see you in the morning. And I ran. And I'm sure he thought I was crazy. But I went down to the proverbial coffee shop where everybody in a small town gathers to gossip and talk about what's going on. So I went in and I started talking to people and I said, what's the story that you all are all talking about that the paper hasn't printed? And they, well, funny you should ask, because it was a medical school in this city. And there was this very beautiful old oval wooden building that is where people who were studying medicine would go to watch the teachers working on a cadaver. So it was like, you know, this oval and no windows, just slats that would open. Anyway, it was quite beautiful. And the university wanted to tear it down to make a parking lot. So the people of the city were very upset because it's part of their history. So I started photographing them and interviewing them, and then I went over to the university and I interviewed people, and then I snuck into this beautiful building for the end of the day, and all the slats were open and the sunlight was just pouring in, and it was beautiful. It was like it was haunted. And so I was staying with a friend who had a darkroom, and this was the days of film. So I processed the film and I made 10 prints and I stayed up all night writing a story. And at 9 o'clock, I went to the paper and the managing editor said, what are you doing here, miss? I told you we're not going to hire you. And I said, well, before you throw me out, I did a story yesterday that your paper hasn't written about, and it's what everybody's talking about. So could you please at least look at the pictures and read the story? And he did, and he shook his head and he looked up at me and said, you have the job. He said, we were considering them would go to that trouble. So this is an important story for all of us to remember. My mama, my parents divorced when I was 6 months old, but my mama raised me. She was a scientist, but she taught me something very important, and that is, don't beat your head up against the wall. Find a way around it. There's always a way around it. And that really made a difference in my life. So anyway, I did that for a year. And then I went to New York City to seek my fortune. And I had a friend who was working as a photo editor at Associated Press in New York. And so he said, you know, we don't have any women photo editors, and you should go apply for a job. So I did. And I went through many, many applications, and that is to say many interviews. And so finally, they said, we really like you and we'd really like to hire you, but we don't have a position and somebody has to quit. And I thought, oh, great. So that could be in a year. So I went and got a job in a furniture store. And happily, about 2 months later, they called me and wanted to quit. And so I became a photo editor at Associated Press in New York. And I loved it. I thought, I will always do this. And it was an amazing opportunity and really a great way to learn about caption writing, which nobody ever talks about. Writing a good caption is like writing a short story, and it makes all the difference in people understanding what they're looking at. In fact, I teach a class in caption writing because a lot of people don't do it. Even the best, some of the best National Geographic photographers don't write the best captions. I'm a caption queen. That's one thing I'll say. So anyway, and while I was working there, I started to go to Africa on my vacation to try to find some little stories, little travel stories. So I did that twice, and I managed to sail them. And I thought, maybe I could do this. Maybe I can be a photographer. And so I saved my money and I quit my job. I left my boyfriend and I went to Africa for 2 years to cover the war in Zimbabwe. I don't think of my Zimbabwe, it used to be called Rhodesia. It was the British had commandeered it, so to speak, and it used to be called Rhodesia. But its ancient name was Zimbabwe, and it's called that now. But I went to cover the war, and the thing is, I'm not a war photographer, but anytime there's this sort of thing going on around you, there's lots of stories that people have. And so I did those stories, and I worked a lot for the New York Times. And so I would send little packages to the New York Times negatives, because this was again before, first of all, you just couldn't send pictures. I mean, none of that existed. So I covered the war until the end and the ceasefire, and it became Zimbabwe again. And then I came back to the States. Anyway, and I really didn't have anything to do, so I started finding silly little stories that I could tell in New York. Like I found a magic shop that had a cat that could do magic tricks. And so I did a story on that, and I sold it to the awful, what is the magazine that you buy at the checkout stand at the grocery store? What is it? No. Inquirer. Yes, thank you. And they loved it, and they paid me really well. And they said, please, if you find any more stories like this, come. And so I found a gentleman who had a store where he repaired toys that had been, and when I went, he was wearing a doctor's uniform and a stethoscope, whatever that is. And he had all these little beds lined up so that when a little girl and her mama would come into the store, he would put them in the bed and say, it's all gonna be fine. And I did that story. And then I ended up doing one more story on a dog who would go to every house in the morning on his block to say good morning. And one day a car hit him and he didn't get killed, but everybody went down to talk to the leaders, and they wanted some signs put up. So I did the whole story. His name was Fido. I did the whole story on my stomach because I wanted people to see the world from Fido's point of view, and except when he would go up the steps to say good morning to somebody. And anyway, so these were little silly stories, but they paid really well, and that's what interested me at the time. And with that money, I started going to Cuba to learn and teach myself how to do long form storytelling. I don't mean for this to be so long, but at any rate, I think it's important to understand how many steps sometimes we have to take to get to where we want to be. And there's no, in the theater, there's a saying that there are no small parts, there are only small actors. And so you can take the smallest thing and make it wonderful. So anyway, I started going to Cuba. I never show this work. It's terrible. But I learned how to tell a long form story and how to continue to go back and go back and go back, because you're not only learning about making better pictures, hopefully, but you're learning about culture and the people and how they live and all of these things. So, that's really what got me started. And at any rate, and then I started working for the New York Times and National Geographic. I have a good story for that. I went when I was very young to National Geographic, and there was a very much older director of photography, and I had just done this big project again on my own on but the ones who had been the original cowgirls at rodeos, cowgirls, they all had ranches and things like that, and it got published throughout Europe because Europe is very interested in cowboys and cowgirls and Texas, all these things. So I took that work to show him, and he kind of said, "Nah, this is no good," and I talked to him a little bit, and then he said, "You'll never work here." And I said, "Well, thank you for your time." And I left, and I thought, well, he did me a very good favor, which was his way of telling me, you have to be better. And I thought, I'm going to work there one day. I'm going to do it. And happily, I can say that that happened. And again, it wasn't without a lot of work, but it was worth it. So at any rate, I've done about 17 stories for National Geographic. I'm going to show you one of them. That was a 3-year project on face transplants. I love science. My mother was a scientist. And there were all kinds of opportunities, but I'm going to jump forward now just to say that at some point, my boyfriend and I broke up, and I'd been in New York, and it was getting expensive, and I hit a wall, and I just thought I had to leave New York. I had to leave New York, and I had been coming to Miami, and made some. One day the phone rang, and it was the Miami Herald, and they were looking for a director of photography, and they wanted to interview me, and I thought, oh, the ancestors are listening, so I came down here. Ancestors, be nice to them. Always remember, my mother was Cherokee. I'm a quarter Cherokee, and so we have certain beliefs, but those beliefs are all over the world and many, many cultures. There's all over Africa and all over the place. Anyway, so I went down, I was interviewed, and they offered me the job, and I worked at the Miami Herald as the director of photography. I think it was 4 years, and I had the people that I got to work with were amazing, and many of them are here. Amazing talents and really dedicated. We did a lot of things. Candice Barbeau is here. She and another one of our photographers, Nori Valbona, found a story while they were on assignment, and so they came and they had been going on their own to work on this story. So they brought it to me, and they wanted to keep working on it. And I looked at the pictures and I said, "This is a beautiful story." So they took them off the daily book and they started working on it. And I would go to the Metro editor to show her what we were doing, and she would look at them like, we don't do photo-driven projects at this paper. And I said, okay, well, I'll show you some more pictures when they come in. And because everybody was terrified of her, but I was not. I was not afraid. She couldn't touch me, and I knew it. So, but I never go in like to fight, because there's better ways. It's not this, it's this. So they kept going, and this story was beautiful. It was a story about people in, help me with the place. And the area was called Liberty City. Yes. So there were a lot of drugs going on, and they were taking back their streets and planting beautiful plants, and they would meet under a bright light in the evening and make a circle and have prayers. And many of the gentlemen would get on bikes and do ride through the talented women, finished. And so I went over to the, I'm not going to say what I think of her, but anyway, and she said, I told you many times we don't do this. And I said, well, we're going to do it now with or without you. And we want a writer, and we know the writer we want. And so you can back off and let us do this, or we can go talk to the publisher. And that was all it took. So we got a wonderful writer, and it was a Pulitzer Prize finalist in that year. And it was beautiful, and it raised everybody up. And then J. Albert Diaz, who was a wonderful photographer who was in our Broward Bureau, he was on his own time working on a project about the new American dream for new immigrants. And he was really on fire. And his Metro editor would not, he just ignored me. And I would drive up there to show him the pictures and everything, just ignored me. So when J. Albert had finished it was beautiful. So I sent out an email to the publisher, the bigwigs, the man who runs the presses, the designers, and J. Albert, and we practiced and practiced, because at National Geographic, when you finish a story, you have to make a presentation, and everybody is there, and it's like, ugh. But and so I said, we're going to do this, and you're going to make a presentation. So everybody came, and J. Albert made the presentation. And when it was over, Alberto Ibargüen, who was the publisher, jumped up out of his seat and said, this is exactly what the kind of thing we should be doing. And that Metro editor was there looking, kind of sheepish. And we talked about whether we had the press, enough paper, and blah, 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 all of this. And the best part was that the people who sell, what are they called? Anyway, where you sell ads in the paper and things, sorry. And they had dollar signs in their eyes. They were just, oh, we could do this, we can make a lot of money, we'll make a special edition and everything, and they did. And that was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in the year of 9/11. So those are kind of long stories, but the thing is that when you're in a position to lift everybody else up, always do it, because this is something that was wonderful. Anyway, after about 4 years, even though it's the most talented group of people I've ever worked with. Every single person, amazing, amazing, amazing people. Anyway, after 4 years, I missed being the wild horse running across the open plain. So I went back to freelancing. And so one of the things, I'm going to show you 3 stories. And one of the places I started going on my own was Haiti. This is a country that I love dearly. And I on my own. And I had read something in the paper that there were lots of food riots going on in Haiti, and people were starving to death because all of the food aid was being brought into Haiti was being sold on the black market, and nobody could afford it. So anyway, I went and I said, I'm going to see what's going on here. And I spoke French, but over time I learned Haitian, and that is the most exquisite language. I just can't tell you. This language is amazing. And I read all kinds of things, but I realized that to know a place, you have to go to the place. And if you want to know about the place, let the people tell you, not some anthropologist who wrote a book, but learn from the people, because it's their story. It's their story. It's not my story. It's their story. So anyway, so I'm going to start showing pictures. I bet you're like, yeah, good. Okay, so I went up north where there were these food demonstrations going on, and so there was this day-long demonstration, and then finally toward the afternoon, everybody broke out and they ran over to this big warehouse that had all of this food aid in it that they could not get. And so this little boy, so this was the days of film. So it was just crazy. I mean, things were going on all over the place, and you could stand in one place and just turn like this and be getting pictures. But this little boy went and tried to steal this box of food from under this shutter. And the army came in, and they came in and they started trying to beat people. People were fighting over uh, tins of oil and bags of flour, and they were just fighting each other because they were starving. Anyway, the military came, and after a few minutes, they pulled back because they are of those families. A lot of the military comes from these poor families. So they pulled back and they let the people have the food. So this is called When Hunger Overcomes Fear, and it won a World Press Photo Award. And so I started going to Haiti, and am I in the way? Okay. And one of the things I did was, and everybody does this when they go to a foreign country, is I started hanging out with street kids. So these were mainly little boys, and they had left home because there were too many children, or they would try to do some things like washing cars to give their mother some money and things like that. So they're the ones who taught me Creole, actually. And I just hung out and I did a whole series on these two gangs. They weren't really gangs, like they were little boys, and they would wash cars and things like that, anything they could do. And sometimes we would have parties, like I'd go buy a bunch of fruit or something, and they would eat, and I took them to the beaches sometimes. But they saved my life one day as well. I'm not kidding; they saved my life. But anyway, so I learned Creole, and I started walking through the slums because that's where all of the poor people live, and also it's where so much of the Haitian culture can be seen. And it was so wonderful to be able to speak Creole. And so I came up on this uh, thing, and I started talking with this gentleman and asking him, what is this thing with the heart on it? And he said, well, it used to be a public watering hole, and it broke, and the government has never come to fix it. So we have to walk 3 or 4 miles to get water. And then he started talking about how difficult life was, and he started to weep. And I use Leica cameras. I use the little range finders, and I have some Leicas that are a little bigger. But I really like in these situations where you're going into an area where people haven't eaten and they don't have water, and and I've seen photographers walking in the slums that look like a camera store. It's crazy, but so but I like this little camera because it's so quiet and it's unobtrusive. So anyway, and I just took this one picture and I call it Broken Heart Pump. And I used to see, when I was driving north, I would always see these people on top of this one mountain, and I decided, what are they doing up there? I'm going to go up there. So I climbed up before the sun came up one day, and nobody was there. And I was sitting and waiting. And then one by one, people started coming up, and they went up to pray, to be closer to God and to pray every day. And so I just sat there and watched, because I think sometimes it's the right thing to do. You don't just start in these situations photographing. So I just waited for them to get used to me. And anyway, then the minister came, and I told him that I would really like to photograph, and he said, that's fine, up top. Anyway, back to when people were starving to death. And Haiti had been overseen by a dictator, the Duvalier family, and Papa Doc was the most cruel leader, sadly, of the Haitian people. And he finally died. But during his reign. He would, thousands and thousands and thousands of people were killed by him and the secret police. If the secret police wanted your daughter, they could take her, or your mule, they could take it, or your farm, they could take it. They were horrible. Anyway, Papa Doc died and the baby Doc took over, but he really wasn't interested. He wanted to ride motorcycles and do drugs, and he married this very beautiful woman, Haitian woman, and she would go to Paris and buy mink coats and all kinds of things. So at any rate, people were starving, and so France and the U.S. got in touch with Baby Doc and said, "Time to go, brother, because this is not good." And more people were fleeing Haiti to come here, and in the horrible boats, and they would drown, and bodies would wash up on the shore. And a lot of the Miami Herald photographers did really important work on that. I think Carol might have still been then. Carol Guzzi, who's back there. Anyway, so little by little, one day, it was time to go, and we heard, all of the reporters heard, oh, something's going to happen tonight. And sure enough, Baby Doc and his wife drove onto a big plane and left. So little by little, everybody started to coming out because they heard little by little that Duvalier was gone, and people started singing and dancing for the first time, and wealthy people came out and danced with poor people, and it was a beautiful, beautiful day. And this is the celebration, and everybody was weeping, but with joy. And then the secret police were put on trial, and this was one of the trials for one of them. And then there was an attempt to start to have the first democratic change. There were still a lot of secret police in hiding, and they would try to really stop this happening. But so there was a lot of violence. And one morning, all night, the night before, all night long, people they've been shooting all night long, shooting, and the next morning, we, the journalists and photographers, went out, and the Haitians were so wonderful. They would say, you have to photograph this person. He was killed here. You have to photograph it. They were amazing, and they wanted us to photograph so that people would see outside of Haiti what was going on. And then this one man took me and another photographer to this little pathway, and this man had been killed, and his body had put in this little alcove to warn people that if you go to vote, this will be your fate. And it's called the Dead Blue Man. And the other photographer is more of an art photographer, so he kind of did something very different. But I would say, if I had to say there was something about my work, it's intimate. I want to be up close. And I used to have long lenses and stuff like that, but I don't do that anymore because I want it to be intimate. And so this is the picture I took, and it's very sad. It's very sad. And so election day came, and people lined up at the polling stations. It was amazing. It was thrilling that these people were going to vote for the first time in 30 or 40 years. It was thrilling. And then again, the secret police, who were still hanging on, drove to all of the polling stations all over the country, and they massacred thousands of people at the polling stations, and they burned them, and they burned the ballots. Thank you. And it was horrible. I was almost killed that day. A journalist was killed. It was terrible. The next day, all of the journalists left on special flights, but I'm there for the long run. And so there started to be funerals and funerals and funerals, 5 funerals in a church at the same time. And funeral would meet funeral at the church door. And these are things we have to photograph. So I went to this one church, and I just looked and tried to figure out which family I might sit down next to, to to ask them what had happened and if I could go with them to the burial. And I found that family, and they were going to take their mother had been killed. And so they were going to walk with her body through the streets and go to the big national cemetery. Come with us because we want people to see this. And so in this cemetery, everybody's buried above the ground because much of Haiti is below sea level. So they put the body of the mama into the crypt, and when they when they covered it over with cement, her son rose up in this last anguish of heartbreak. And again, this is days of film. You don't know what you're getting, but this was a gift. And yeah, his mother died. And I have a book on Haiti that was published by Aperture, and this is the cover. Anyway, so justice in Haiti is kind of meted out on the moment. And there were some robbers who had been caught in the act, and they ran and they jumped into the water, and the police went out in a little boat and brought them back. And I had seen this group of people down by the harbor, and when you see a group of people, as a journalist or a photographer, you stop and you go to see what's going on. And I was the only foreigner there. And so this man with his arms up was walking to the shore to turn himself in. And when he got there, I saw out of the corner of my eye a rifle raise up, and they shot him right then and there. And yeah, that's a terrible thing to see. Then there was another attempt at elections, and there was a university professor who was running, and everybody felt that the military was behind him, and that no matter what they did, that the voting would be crooked. And so they set downtown Port-au-Prince on fire on that day. But this is Leslie Manigat, and he was the professor, and he became the president, and that's after the inauguration. So many, many years went by. He only lasted 4 months, and then there was a military coup d'etat, and this was something that happened in Haiti constantly. And anyway, years went by, and there was this priest, Father Aristide, who was he was a liberation priest, and he was very outspoken against the US. And I'm sorry to say, this country has done a lot of very bad things in Haiti, and so has France. And these are the colonial kind of powers. And anyway, so Aristide decided to leave the priesthood and to run for president. And so again, people voted well into the night, and people lined up for as long as miles. And even though men with machine guns would drive by and shoot at them, they were determined to have this man as their president. And he won. And I had been doing a lot of work in his church. I was photographing them. And I used to go see him sometimes to ask him to explain Haiti to me and how he saw it. And again, always learning, always learning. And so anyway, he called me. I was back in New York, and he called me and asked me if I would come and take his official picture. And I said, yeah, of course. So I flew down there. Now he's a little guy. So I could probably I could probably throw him over my shoulder, but that's not very respectful. But anyway, and so this, the official portrait is like this, but this was too tall, so we had to put him on some paper, and so that's not. I love this picture, and he got the picture he needed. But this was after the day after that everybody found out that Aristide had been elected, and they went out and they celebrated. They cleaned the streets, they hung flowers, was very beautiful. And then I just started to go to Haiti, not when things were going on, but when things were calm. And I love to go into the slums because that's where real life is being lived. And I think a lot of times people thought I was a nun or something because I didn't carry a lot of gear. And I would, it's hot as hell. So I would wear skirts and who cares? But, and just get daily life, just a sense of daily life. And then I started going out much more. It's still in the countryside because dramatically they've grown and they've changed. There's a lot of new buildings because of the 2010 earthquake. Anyway, so, and again, you don't just come upon something and start photographing. You have to, if you enter somebody's yard, say respect, which is respect, respect, and then they say respect back to you, which means that you can come in. Okay, so anyway, this is just farmers at the end of the day, and I went to do a story about life in a Haiti village, and I stayed with the people there, and they were really wonderful. And one day, pardon me, this lady came up, and these are very poor people. They would never be able to go to have a portrait made in a studio. So she asked me if I would do a portrait of her and her family, and I said, "Oh yes, why not? It'll be wonderful." And so she ran home and got her children, and she brought them back, and I set up this little site, and I put some hibiscus in her blouse, and I tried to make it something very special for them. And so I took a lot of pictures, more than I needed, but I took a lot of pictures, and I turned around. The whole village had lined up to get photographed, and you had no idea what a beautiful, happy, hilarious day. Everybody was so excited and so happy. And so I went home and I made prints for everybody. And photographers don't always make a lot of money, but this was important. And the next time I went back, I drove into the village. Everybody came running from the fields, and I started handing out the pictures. And people were laughing, and they were showing each other, "Look, look, that's you!" And they were laughing and playing, and they were so happy. And I just thought, I get so many gifts from being in Haiti, so many life lessons, so much knowledge. And I thought, this is the least I can do. And that night, they killed a pig. Now, the pig is the farmer's piggy bank. So when they have the little babies, they can sell them, right? But to have some farmers who barely make a living to kill a pig in your honor there's nothing like it. And I think it was the first time that I really understood what the value of a photograph could be. Not the awards, not being published, but giving something to these people was amazing. Anyway, just more kind of stuff. And I was in this really abandoned kind of place where there's no trees. There's a lot of trees are cut down in Haiti to make charcoal, so it's really bad. A lot of deforestation. But so I was looking, I thought, okay, they always say, okay, if you're a good photographer, you'll find a picture no matter where you are. Which is not true. It's not true. It's just silly. But and then I was like, "Eh." And then I heard somebody singing, and I turned around, and it was this little girl, and she was singing and dancing, and I started talking to her, and she said, "It's my birthday, and my mama bought me this dress." So a lot of clothes are sent to Haiti. They're called pepe, and if you go to the open market, you can find piles of clothing. You go to the open market, you can find piles of clothing, and it's a quarter for something. And so this was her birthday dress, and I asked her if I could photograph her, and I did. She said, okay. And then I was always looking at how can I talk about how Haiti is markets for other countries, because we also have to look at the economies of, it's not just one thing, it's like the whole circle of everything. So I thought the economy here is so bad, and a lot of hanky-panky going on. But I like bright color plastic stuff. I can't help it. I just like it. So I was drawn to can't help it. I just like it. So I was drawn to this. And as I started photographing, I saw that people were going by. And I thought, well, this is a really great idea that here are the people, and these are some of the things that China sends to be sold. So it was something. And I also started learning about voodoo. And voodoo is a much maligned religion that was brought by the Africans who were brought to the New World against their will. And it was very, very important. And a lot of people sadly go to Haiti and call it the devil worship. It's not. It is not. It is not. It is a very beautiful language and spiritual happening. And you'll see so many Catholic saints and things like that. They each represent a different spirit. So like Erzuli, the Holy Virgin is Erzuli, the goddess of love. There's two goddesses of love. One is the love of mother, and the other one is the sexy love. And so anyway, and to go into these temples, you have to be invited. So I started to get to know these people. And in the cemeteries, every Friday and Saturday, there would be voodoo ceremonies because almost every place like this has a big, what is it called? Thank you, cross, sorry. Anyway, and so people would come and they would have these ceremonies. So again, I was walking through the cemetery, so sorry. and I stopped, and there it was. And again, you don't start taking pictures. You wait to be sort of acknowledged. And so I took a few pictures, and then the man who was having the ceremony left, and the voodoo priest was drunk as a skunk. And because there is a lot of, oh, good, okay. But there was a lot of drinking of this wonderful Haitian rum, which is, if you've never tried it, try it. I think it's the best rum in the world. But Barbancourt, yes. Anyway, and so he was kind of still possessed, and he came over to me, and he took me in his arms, and he started dancing me around the cross. And then finally he stopped. And I always wore little cotton shirts because it's so hot. And I would always keep a couple of dollars in a little pocket here. And he stopped, and he just pulled the pocket open and he took the dollars and he tipped his hat and left. So he got $2 and I got to dance with a voodoo priest. Yeah. And again, I got to know many, many voodoo people, and so that I could understand voodoo. And I think it's a very complicated, beautiful thing that is misinterpreted quite often, which is a pity, because they worship God and they worship all the saints. They're not worshiping the devil. There is, however, a darker side to voodoo, and there are some places where the Ungan is a bit darker. But generally speaking, something I failed to tell you was Haiti was the first Black republic in the history of the world, the first. And it was the second republic in the world after the United States. And we fought, when we fought our revolution against England, the Haitians fought alongside of us. So first Black Republic, and the way that they started to be free from the slave masters was the one thing that these people would be worked to death. because they were not considered to be people. And so the one thing that the French masters allowed the enslaved people to keep was their voodoo, was their religion. So they would have these tambours, and they would message each other at different places. And that's how they planned a revolt. And one night, everybody came out, and it was a horrible slaughter. There was a horrible slaughter of all of the French people. They killed babies, they killed people, women, many people were slaughtered, but they had been so treated so badly, they were basically worked to death. And then all kinds of things happened after that, which we don't have the time to talk about. In 2010, there was a terrible earthquake in Haiti. Thousands and thousands of people, I think over 30,000, maybe 40,000 people were killed. And it was heartbreaking because Port-au-Prince is the capital. It used to be really beautiful city, but even though it was falling a little bit into disrepair, it still had the history of the economy, the history of the culture. And this earthquake was devastating, and so many buildings collapsed, and you would pass schools and you could see the legs of little children sticking out from these buildings, and they were crushed. And so I went with a New York Times reporter, and I started taking pictures. And this was downtown, and people were so poor, they would go to the slums, where the trash was collected, and they would fight over anything they could find just to try to rebuild. And people are still living in tent camps in many areas. And then more recently, there was another earthquake, and it's just terrible. And this was the National Palace. It was like a beautiful wedding cake, and it just fell down. So there's lots more to show you, but that's Haiti, and I can't go now because it's a bit too violent with gangs. But I worked there over a 30-year period. I love this country. I love the Haitian people. I think it's the luckiest thing that ever happened to me was to go to that country. So I'm an only child and raised by my mother, who I mentioned was a scientist. And when she started to get older, she started to lose her memory. And so I was trying to take care of her between Miami and Austin, Texas. And I would go. The Herald was really great to me. I could get a week off every month to go take care of my mama. And finally, she couldn't stay alone. And I had a friend who would go and check on her every day. But anyway, at some point, so I looked at 50 places in this area, and I found an amazing place. It wasn't a big place. It wasn't terribly fancy, but it was nice. But everybody who worked there were Haitians and Romanians and Cubans. And they would dress everybody up and comb their hair, and they were beautiful characters. And I could spend there in lots of wonderful things. So this is my mama, family photos. And eventually I did it on memory for National Geographic. And this was the cover. My little mama was a cover girl. And I was so happy for that. By then she was gone. But anyway, so that's Mad. And so I brought her here. And she was a recluse. She didn't like people. So that was kind of a problem. But at this place, she just blossomed. And she became happy. And it was very exciting. And this is going to lunch one day. And she always had this little stuffed kitty animal because she loved cats. And she just blossomed. And then at some point she started to wander, and it was in the middle of Miami. So I had to find another Hollywood. It's called Midtown Manor. And I took better. Like anytime she woke up, she could have breakfast in bed. It didn't matter if it was 10 a.m. she could have breakfast in bed. And she really did well there. This is on one of her birthdays. So I would also take my mama home on the weekends, and I would photograph her. We would have a good time. But so one day I wanted to do a portrait of her, and so I had her sitting. I had a backdrop, and I had her sitting on here. Now I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but I don't know why I asked her to do this, but I asked her if she would take her dress off, and she did, and she was naked, and I said, just sit down on the stool, and she did, and I took a picture, and I did it with 2¼ film, and then I put her dress back on her, and you might say, well, why did you do that, Maggie? Well, I wanted a picture of the vessel that brought me into this world. I wanted to see her body so that when she was gone, I would remember what she looked like. But I also realized at that moment that my mama was gone. She was not here anymore because she was a very prim, proper lady, and she would never have done that. And she would have been aghast that I would ask her, but it's for me. No one has ever seen the picture but me, and it will die with me. It will be cremated with me. And she's cremated, and I have her in the most beautiful jar that you can see through, and I decorate it all the time for holidays, and it means a lot to me because I have my mother right there, and I can't tell you, it's lovely. It's a wonderful thing. Anyway, so but there was a point where my mother decided she wanted to be sexy. Now, she was a scientist, right? And she was very proper, but she decided she wanted to be sexy. So we went, she was a scientist, right? And she was very proper, but she decided she wanted to be sexy. So we would dress her up with that, and she would walk around her room like this. And after she got enough of that, we would put her little dresses on her. But see my mother as being sexy, because how many of us really see our mothers as being sexy? We don't want to see it. No. But it was thrilling because I learned so much about my mother that I didn't know, because walls fall down and things, they share things with you. I mean, people with dementia, they just suddenly spill things out, and it's kind of, it's extraordinary to get to meet somebody that you lived with most of your life and see new things about them. It was thrilling, and there were some bad days that were tough where she was not happy. This is Mita daughter. She's Romanian, a saint sent from heaven. I'm telling you, she fell in love with my mother. My mother just treated her like she was another daughter, and when she was choking to death. And she would, if Madge was all upset, she would spend the night with her. She did another bad day, of course, and broke one hip. And then this was going to the doctor after surgery, um, see that everything is healed. It's like being in a prison, and but sometimes people get very agitated. One time she tried to jump out of the car when I was driving, so you have to be really careful. And here she is in the gardens at Midtown Manor. And this was another difficult day. And what was also great about this place is they had cats. And she would go out in the garden and just watch the cats for a long time. And one day I was taking her for a ride in her wheelchair, and I came up, it had just rained, and I came up on this puddle, and I started to think, this is so interesting, because this is kind of like the memories that she still has, and all of this that's blank is what's gone. So sometimes I'm really looking for pictures that can mean something more. They can be, I can't think of the word, but anyway, they can mean something beyond. what is, here's somebody in a wheelchair in front of a puddle. It's really means something much more and much bigger. And Madeline would entertain everybody at lunchtime. Nina Dora would. So this is my favorite picture of my mama. It's called Sleeping Beauty. And I think she looks so beautiful. And I would photograph her a lot because I knew the day would come when I couldn't photograph her anymore. And I also photographed her a lot while she was sleeping. So I would get used to seeing what it would look like when she died. I know that sounds morbid, but I'm an only child. This is my family. That's it. No more. So, and all of a sudden she slumped forward. And I had enrolled her in hospice, which is a great program. Please look into that for your loved ones. And so a doctor and a nurse came and they said, well, her heart is beating like this, and what do you want to do? Do you want to take her to the hospital? Okay, my mother was a scientist. She did not like doctors. And I knew she didn't want to do that. So he said, okay, if you don't go to the hospital, she might not last that long. And I said, well, this is what she wants. And they gave her some medicine and they gave us a nurse to be there 24 hours. And so after a few days, and I didn't leave her side, I stayed there. And after a few days, it was like 3 a.m, and she started gurgling this. It's called a death rattle. If you don't know about it, you should. It's shocking and it's terrifying. And I just got in bed with her and I held her like she was my little baby. And I talked to her, and I always, from the time I was 5, and I realized that one day my mother would go, I wanted to be there. I prayed that I would be there. And finally, after about 3 hours, it was just this horrible, horrible noise. And finally, she took her last breath. I can't tell you what that means to me, but it's like, but it's like the last breath is a gift. If you can be there with your loved ones, that's a gift. It's not easy, but it's a gift. And I think it was a wonderful gift. So I had bought this beautiful dress just for this occasion for her. And we had our funeral there. And all of the caregivers came up, and I wanted a picture with her because they had taken such good care of her. And then the people from the crematorium came, and we had put little roses all around her. She was beautiful, and she had this long hair, and I made braids and cut them and gave everybody one braid. And when the crematorium people came, they were sort of like, whoa. They said, we've never seen anything so beautiful. We usually have to pick up people who have died alone or under bad circumstances, but they said, we're going to take good care of your mother. And I did go see her one more time, and they had put all of these little roses around her again, and it was, so I learned a lot, and I show this work to encourage people to stay the course. When you go through these things with your family, a lot of people just dump their loved ones and they never come back. And I've seen that in these homes. And if you and be there, in the end, you get the greatest gift, and it's the last chance to love. And I think it's really important. Don't be afraid. Be the one who sees them off in the best way possible. It's of course, I would hold my mama. Yes, of course I would. And it turns out that the nurse we had was Haitian, and she was praying. It was a gift for me. Anyway, so because of that story, I was given a very extraordinary story by National Geographic magazine. I've done a lot of stories for Nat Geo and some science stories, which are I love them, but I've managed to do work all over the world, and because of the National Geographic, and I'm one lucky gal, and I never ever forget, and it is not easy, but it's amazing. So they got um, they got a call from the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio, that this young lady named Katie had had attempted suicide and with a rifle, and she managed only to blow her face off. So it's amazing that she lived. And the doctors made up this face for her from her stomach, from the thigh, and she had no nose, so she had to breathe through her throat. Her eyes were shifted. Her mouth was like this. So when she ate, all the food would fall out. Anyway, it was horrible. So don't do that. None of you will do that. But teach your sons, okay? Remember. So um, this is Katie from. So every time I would go visit, this was a 3-year project, and so you can see she has no nose. This is how her mouth looks. It's she was so beautiful, but she was so her family, her parents were teachers. They had to quit. They had to go to live in a McDonald house, Ronald McDonald House, and uh, which is free. And they were lucky in this regard, and that was that the government, the military, had decided to give Cleveland Clinic a multi-million-dollar grant because so many military people were coming back with face, uh, their faces had been just really terrible. And the Cleveland Clinic had done a number of face transplants. Nobody ever comes out looking quite the same. But anyway, so every time I would go to see Katie and her family, and they just embraced me. They were so wonderful, so intimate and everything. But I would always take a portrait of Katie with flowers, just in case her got her face donated, that at least there would be something. And people will donate all kinds of things if somebody's dying, the heart, the lungs, the kidney, all kinds of things. A face is so personal, it's very hard uh, for people to let go of that. So anyway, this is the first day I met Katie, and she was in the hospital after a surgery. That's her mother. And this surgery was awful. They had basically implanted these screws into her cheek, and every day there was a turning of the screw to pull her bones that weren't injured a little bit closer, so that it's like preparing the face in case something became available. And she was always in pain, always in pain. And they all went through therapy, as you can imagine. And so they got out of the hospital that day, and they wanted to go to a beautiful park because it was the first day of spring. And so we went, and they took a nap, and I sort of photographed. And Katie never gets to be alone, so this was a moment for her to just be alone. That's her brother, and it was his rifle that she used. But somebody had given him the rifle, and that's a pity too. And she will never see again. She's not blind. She can see light and dark uh, because it was she can't have eye implants. So she was learning Braille. Okay. And this was an evening when Katie was in horrible, horrible pain. And finally, we had to go to the hospital. So whenever I go, I always take them out to 2 or 3 really nice dinners because we are given money in our budget to do this. And her mother would have to feed her because the food would just fall out like that. And this was after that horrible apparatus was taken out. And here you can see more clearly, this is what she looks like. And just walking out in the autumn, oops, and oh dear me. Okay, so she got to meet 2 other face transplant uh, people, and The woman on the right died recently, but her husband had shot her in the face, and they managed to work with what was left. And then this guy was in a terrible, um, thank you, motorcycle. You know, you get up here and you just lose words. Except he was pretty good at it. Anyway, so he got a new face, but it still needed multiple surgeries to. It's too big, right? So you have to have surgery after surgery to really make it work. And you have to stay strong. She had to really stay strong physically in case she got her face. And then this is her mother watching her exercise at home. And so, as I said, I always did portraits with flowers of Katie whenever I went to see her. And I was staying in this old hotel that was really beautiful. And so while I was setting up lights, she and her father started dancing with each other and singing to each other. And I shot that on video as well. So one day, the hospital got a call because there's this organization that will go to people and ask them after their loved one has died if they would be willing to donate the face. But so the hospital had actually approached this lady, Sandra. Sandra was the guardian of her granddaughter, who was also very beautiful. And she overdosed on a drug. She overdosed on drugs, so she became brain dead. And Sandra decided that she would donate her granddaughter's face to Katie. And this is the day before she's going to meet Katie after the face transplant, when she's going to get to see Katie and see her granddaughter's face on Katie. So she was showing us all of these pictures of Audra, her granddaughter. That's Audra. And these are just some of the doctors. She had like 40 doctors and nurses and everything. So they would go to the cadaver lab every other Monday evening. I'm kind of a dark person sometimes, but I found it very interesting. And so I went with them and I would photograph them, because you can't, even if it's a cadaver, you cannot photograph the face because it's somebody's family or something and you could be sued. But that was interesting. And so Katie got the face, and it was literally sewn on like this all the way around. And here you can see the stitches. And finally, the stitches were taken out, and Katie was. It's painful. And she was scared, and she was crying, and and that was just before the stitches were taken out. And so you have to get the patients up and walking and everything. So they would walk around the floor and Katie would sing, sort of. And here is Sandra meeting Katie, and Katie looks beautiful. And Sandra and Katie wept together and they prayed together, and Sandra said, "You look beautiful." And it was to an end. Katie got the face. And how do you end this story? How do you end it? And one of the things that really struck me very deeply were her parents. Her parents put everything, their own lives aside, to bring this to a closure. And I thought of them as, okay, I'm going to mention the ancestors again, but in a lot of indigenous beliefs, uh, when you see the eagle flying overhead, those are our ancestors, and they're watching over us. And I thought, they are those eagles. They really are like those eagles, and they were watching over their bed. And I love to get up on beds and shoot one small light that had an umbrella, and a light umbrella, and then I took a little lamp, and I wanted it to be very, very personal. And this was the last picture. And yeah, and so, and I wanted to, I'm gonna, shouldn't have done that probably. But anyway, there was something else I wanted to show you that's completely different, but I really don't want to. I think we don't have time, and I want to leave time for questions. You know, there are always people saying, "Oh, I'm a professional photographer," and then I hear this word. Maybe what is it? Oh, amateurs. We're never going to say that word. People who are not making a living at photography and just do it for the joy of it, you're enthusiasts. It's a much better word. And I hate to hear somebody say, oh, well, they're not serious or something. Shame on them, because photography belongs to everybody. And look, because of these, everybody in the world can be a photographer. And a lot of professionals complain about that. Everybody thinks it's so easy. It's not easy. And now there are many, many more photographers than there ever were before. And one of the great challenges is, sadly, that a lot of publications don't have the same amount of money that they used to have, because so much advertising has gone to the internet and these things. But I love this because I go to Haiti, and even this poorest farmer has a phone and pictures, as many as you want, and be the enthusiast. You know, don't ever let somebody call you whatever it's that I'm not saying anymore. um, being enthusiastic, about something, and if something gives you joy, we need to have that joy, and take pictures, because you never know, might be something that means a lot to you. And also, one of the reasons I showed this work on my mother is that I want to encourage people to photograph their families. That's my family. There is nothing else. But photograph your families, because one day they won't be here with us, but you'll have the pictures. And if my house ever caught on fire, I have a big box of family pictures. That's the thing that I would grab. And of course, maybe one camera, and I'll chase the cats out. But this is the most important thing I have. Please photograph your families, please. And when people say, like once I tried to photograph Madge when she was watering the garden, and I was sneaking up, and she turned around and she sprayed me. But anyway, do those family pictures. And I don't care if it's this, but if you use a camera, take the pictures with the camera, because these are the things, this is your legacy. The pictures that you take, not only the pictures of your family, but the pictures that you take, these are your archives, these are your legacies. And this is wonderful. And there's so many more women photographers now than there used to be, which is wonderful, because everybody sees something in a different way. And I think we should celebrate that. We should celebrate the differences and come together to share them. So, yeah. So questions quickly. Any? Don't be shy. Don't be shy. There are no bad questions. I love black and white and color, but I am mainly a color photographer. Whatever is the most suitable, I think. Yeah. And oh, yes.
Aperture, speed. What's your preference? Like Ron said, aperture versus speed.
Honey, I don't even think about.
Good.
No, it depends on what I'm photographing. I keep everything as simple as possible, because it can get, like, I can't even say all the things he does. I know about them, but I'm not such a techie person. It's more about somehow the feeling that you have with people, and being intimate and spending time with them, listening to their stories, trying to understand, telling their stories. And so I work up close, but if I need to get everything in focus, maybe I'll shoot at f/22, or if I want just things to be very soft, I'll be more like f/2. That's the lens opening, And sometimes I'll use a little flash, and I always, I don't direct flash, I always bounce it off something. And I don't carry a lot of equipment, because I've had to run really fast in some situations. I mean, I was almost beheaded in Haiti in the church where the priest was, the priest became president because it was attacked by about 40 men with machine guns and machetes and clubs on a particular Sunday, and there was only one way out, and everybody had gone there, and it was just, you couldn't get through. And I panicked, and I ran down the middle aisle trying to get out the front door and right into the arms of a man with a machete, and he grabbed me and he swung, but I ducked, and then he started to swing again, but I turned on my heel and I ran, and that day I wore an old dress. Thank goodness for these old dresses, because he held the dress and it tore all the way down to here. And I think he was so shocked he let go. And then for 3 hours we were caught with them shooting at us, but I got out, and yeah, I got out. So I'm here today. Yes.
Kind of on that topic, do you have any advice for particularly like young women who want to be shooting in areas that may be dangerous, or anything that you found particularly helpful when you might be alone, but you still want that opportunity to be in that space?
Right. Well, of course, nobody knew that the church was going to be attacked, but I would say always follow your gut. Every time I've not followed my gut, if something says, don't do this, Maggie, or it might be a little dangerous, I've been in those situations and I've learned follow your gut. When it says, don't go, no picture is worth what might happen to you. But I would say if you're going into a tricky situation, go with 2 or 3 photographers or 2 or 3 people, maybe a couple of friends. I think it's very important to look at all the kinds of photography you can do, but then decide what you think you want to concentrate on. I've also been a fashion photographer in New York for 3 years, and I did a lot of work for Italian designers, and that was so much fun because it was just like play, just so much fun. And I would make up little stories, and the models would act it out, and I loved that until I finally thought, well, this is fun, but it's much ado about nothing. At least after I wanted to go back out and tell real stories. But there's lots of things you can do with photography. You can do portraiture, family photos. You can, if you want to a working photographer, then start working on a long-term project. Long-term projects are what have moved me forward every time. And remember, I've been a director of photography, but also a photo editor, and I also teach a lot of workshops. So the photo editor can see in a long-term project how you tell a story, the variety of pictures you're taking. Also, I was really glad to see you show so many verticals, because everybody seems to always be doing horizontals. And I guess that's because these are horizontal and TV is horizontal. But since this came along, now people are even shooting vertical videos, which isn't the best thing. But anyway, but do both, because sometimes a picture is, I mean, if you're going to photograph a really tall tree, it's vertical. Get back and do that. But I think working on forward, and I'm not talking about a week long, something that you can really stay with. And this doesn't have, like, I mean, even if I had this lady in a workshop once, she was maybe 75, and she photographed her grandchildren, and she brought this box of prints, and the other students were like, oh, who's this? And I just said, well, let's have a look. Her pictures were amazing. They were beautiful. They were intimate. They were funny. And I said, okay, all you fancy young photographers, look at this. And her work was better than any of theirs. So you just never know. Yeah. Yes, I do. And I'd like to, after this weather is horrible going across the country, but when it's warmer, I will go see them again. Oh, but the beautiful thing is, after the story was published, National Geographic has this yearly meeting of the photographers. It's huge. And so they invited Katie and her family to come and to be the guest of National Geographic. And so we got to introduce them, bring them on stage. And it was really lovely. And everybody in the audience, and there's maybe 500 people, they stood up and they gave them a standing ovation for about 5 minutes. And that happened also when Carol Guzzi was there to be interviewed. When you'll hear about her and from her. Um, she also got, I mean, she's won many Pulitzers, and she's really risked her life a lot. And she also got a 5 minute standing ovation. And from your peers, that's really wonderful. But did you have a question?
El volumen a todo lo que damos. Ahorita lo agarro y vamos a caer tus payasos.
No, it's just like if you were standing in line to get a hamburger or something. So what brings you here, or something like that, not like that. But or I'll just maybe strike up a conversation. And sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just look at everything that's going on, because we do have to. We're like hunters, and so we do have to look for things. And sometimes the best picture is behind you. So and it's like a dance. I like to think of photography as a dance. Like sometimes you're dancing cheek to cheek, and other times you're dancing all the way across the room. So move around, especially while you can. So go to the zoo and photograph, and good luck trying. I mean, amazing work, and it can be a very personal story. And I'll just tell this quickly, and then I think I have to stop talking because they just blah, 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 blah. But I started taking the kinds of pictures I had made when I first started photographing, which my teacher said, you'll never make a living if that's the kind of work you're going to do. And I thought, well, okay, I'll get serious. So they're very strange pictures. And I realized that I had this whole other thing that had been pushed back. And so I created a safe place for me. And it's called The Secret Garden of Lily La Palma. Lily is my alter ego. She's dark. But she's happy too. I mean, she's not mean or anything. But and I just started making pictures that were for me and that were fun, and some are kind of strange, and some represent larger issues, but it's not always obvious. And it's the happiest I've been in photography. I still do assignments, I still do these things, but it's really quite honestly the happiest I've been in photography for quite some time, because it's playful, and I don't care if anybody likes it. I don't care. It's not for them, it's for me. And this is also the thing that some people can make you feel lesser than, and don't let that happen. I mean, especially if you're professional or you're going toward that, don't let anybody make you feel lesser than for any reason, right? But anyway, it's called The Secret Garden of Lily La Palma. And so a friend of mine who had received the Guggenheim grant, which is the Guggenheim Museum, they have a foundation, and I said, no, this is silly stuff. They'll never give me a grant. And so she said, no, you have to. So I wrote a very personal proposal that explained The Secret Garden of Lily La Palma. It's very personal because the work is very personal. And they gave me a grant that would sustain me for at least a year. And I've been working on that. And I wish we had more time. I'd show you some of the pictures, but we don't really, because I talk too much. But anyway, any more questions? Or we'll be around if you have them and you're shy. Anyway, thank you.
Also, there's a raffle here. It's going to be here tomorrow. We're going to be giving away hats and flip flops, and t-shirts and printers and things.
Flip-flops.
But you got to be here tomorrow to get the tickets and do the raffle. So that's tomorrow. Okay. Special days, go out yourself something to eat. We'll be back to some great speakers. Thank you.
Tienen el ronda como el MC, el Master